They open their soul to you. And a lot of times they'll tell you information or things about themselves that they won't even share with their spouses, believe it or not. Pretty much trust their life to you. I'm Peter Warmka, a retired CIA officer, founder of Counterintelligence Institute, and I live in Orlando, Florida. At the age of 17, I left Wisconsin for the first time, traveled by car all the way down to Nicaragua, and this is in 1979 when actually the Somoza government was overthrown by the Sandinistas, and I was intrigued by all of these experiences I was having. So my goal in life was somehow get a job in Latin America. And then I found a advertisement in the Wall Street Journal. It was very unique because it was a foreign investment group that was looking to undertake ventures in several countries, in Latin America and in Asia. So I sent in my resume, right? And then a few weeks later, I got this letter that came to me and it said, we're very interested in your background and we want your authorization to forward your resume to one of our clients in the U.S. government. I didn't respond. I put the letter underneath my night table. And then a few months later, my wife would say, whatever happened to that letter? And I said, well, I never responded. And she said, why not? And I said, it just seems crazy. I don't want to work for the U.S. government. And she said, send it in. So I got nagged into sending in the letter. And then eventually I got a call at my office. They wanted to invite me up for an interview. To make a long story less long, they hired me. And that was the beginning of a 23-year career with the CIA. Traveled to over 56 countries during my career. Lived 20 years overseas. And had a variety of really interesting experiences. This kind of like this James Bond, the phenomena, right? It's always the sexy life. He's conducting these missions. He's carrying, he's out shooting. He's killing so many people. I hardly ever carried a gun when when I was overseas. He had a very high profile, right? He would go into a place and everybody would say, "Oh, Bond, James," and everybody knew him. When I was overseas, except my direct management, nobody knew I worked for the CIA. Not even my children. My children did not know until they were about 16 or 17 years old. I was told by the CIA before I went out on my very first tour, now we suggest that you confide to one family member back home. So if there's an emergency and we need to reach out to that family member, they know that this is legitimate versus someone just trying to con them or a fraud. So I decided to tell my father. My father, very patriotic, and I thought, he was going to be like, wow, this is so cool and proud of you, son. I began to tell him, who I really worked for and where I was going, and he was just very serious. And then when I finished, he looked at me in the eye and he said, son, I wish you wouldn't have told me this. Basically concerned probably for the safety, right? Or you're getting involved in an organization and based on what he saw, understood or saw on TV. This is created by Hollywood, right? This is probably the biggest reasons why it's so misunderstood about what we do is the image of Hollywood. We have very low profiles. People don't know that we're working for the CIA, but we have to do it that way. That's the only way. So we have to be able to operate really on what our mission is, how we're able to provide intelligence that hopefully helps to safeguard, make our nation stronger. If you need to have someone patting you on the back or giving you recognition, it's not the career for you because we're kind of like silent, we're like silent warriors. They give privileges to people in the military, which is fine. I got nothing against that. But I'm thinking, man, the military gets a lot of these privileges, recognition, but people that have worked in other capacities for the U.S. government, such as, intelligence, we can't, we can't expose ourselves to having worked there. So we kind of like, we've got to be satisfied with who we are and what we did, and that's it. I was a core intelligence collector. It's we call them case officers. So I was going out there to collect that raw intelligence that is then sent back to Langley, and it's turned into intelligence reports that are disseminated to the intelligence community. And it's basically what it's utilized for policymakers in Washington to make better informed decisions. So we were, at the very end of the spear, let's say, in collecting that information from clandestine sources. It's human intelligence. It's the information that you're collecting from humans that is not necessarily, in a database. It might be just in someone's mind, their head. They've had discussions on something, but it's not documented anywhere. But you get that inside scoop. And so, the deeper you go with some of the sources who have closer access to this information, the better it is. So once we know the requirement, Then we have to go and try to find the individuals who could provide us with access to that information. And we can find those individuals through a number of means. Once they're identified, we can maybe make a cold call if we have a particular pretext why we want to get together with them, bump into an individual or target them during an event. Whether it's, a social cocktail circuit or it's a convention or a conference, if we know people from that organization, the target organization, are going to be there. A lot of times at these events, they also have their name. They have their, if they're at a conference, they'll have the company and their name. And so we can kind of like troll around the area, identify them, and strike up a conversation. That's probably the hardest thing to do. Is you want to meet them on an ongoing basis while you're cultivating that relationship. And so if you can't meet them again, it's very difficult. You got to move on. Sometimes the easiest thing is getting that first encounter, right? Where you happen to bump into that person, you strike up a conversation. What's more difficult is getting, a hook into that individual in the sense of being able to have ongoing contact. This process basically is what we call the assessment process. We want to find out, first of all, does this person have access to what we think they have access to? So we get them to talk about their job and what they do and their opinions and different things. And we also want to find out, are they suitable? Are they potentially, what are motivations or vulnerabilities that they might have, where later on, if we make a pitch to them, that we can turn these in, that we want to make it sort of a win-win. You're helping me and I'm helping you. In some cases with really hard targets, like you're talking about Chinese or the Russians. This might go on for more than a year. In my case, I was very fortunate. In my case, every single person that I pitched did work for me. A lot of that is based on trust. Trust is really the most important thing. They trust you, and they'll open their soul to you. And a lot of times they'll tell you information or things about themselves that they won't even share with their spouses, believe it or not. Pretty much trust their life to you. Then you begin to meet with them, right, to collect that intelligence. And now we're going into a kind of a clandestine mode where, we may meet with them where people are not going to run into me or run into them and see that, why are you working with a government official, right? So we try to get out of the public view. And maybe we use a safe house, or maybe we have meetings in the cars, or maybe we use electronic communications to pass information. There's a lot of different ways, but that in a sense is what's what we call human intelligence, because it's coming through humans. A big part of this also is the security aspect, because before going out to conduct an operation, we have to ensure that we are clean of surveillance, clean of anybody from the local service, tracking us. We have to ensure that we're not taking the host service into anything that we're going to be doing. And so we conduct a surveillance detection route, SDR. Basically, you're out there for about 45 minutes to an hour, maybe even a couple hours, and you're running a route, and it might look like, you got to look like you're running a series of errands or meetings, and you're doing this while you're also looking to see if anybody's following you. How do you know someone's following you? You're going to have double sightings of the same person or the same vehicle. Over time, distance, and change of direction. It's a lot of things. But basically, the purpose of it is to determine, am I being followed? And if I'm being followed, I'm aborting. I'm not going to go on to my sensitive operation. But we have to learn these things prior to going out overseas. We call them cover stories, right? And we have a cover for who we are when we're overseas, and we call that cover for status. I work for the U.S. government. But we call it cover for action. If all of a sudden we're in an activity and we got to be able to explain to somebody, what are we doing together, and try to de-escalate any sort of curiosity. But in my opinion, it's the most important when it comes to conducting secure operations overseas. We got to have a reason so that if anybody looks at us, it looks normal. So we do also a lot of learning on the job, and we have to be very flexible, and be able to readily adapt to a situation that could be new. Even if there's a security threat or incident that happens, like if you're with somebody in a car and all of a sudden, we're stopped. We're stopped by the local authorities. What we do at that particular, we don't want to link the two of us together, but we definitely don't want to link someone from the government that we've recruited and who now is in the car with somebody who's with the U.S. government. We don't, we got to avoid any sort of potential compromises. So there's a lot of different things that we learn. We always will put up before we go out. It's called like a what if scenario. Right? Contingency planning. That is so crucial. We look through every single thing that can happen along the way in our operational day. And if this happens, we automatically will know this is how we're going to respond. We think all of these things through. So it's so crucial. It's when you don't think through these things through, we allow Murphy to happen. I don't know if, we talk about Murphy a lot in our And our business, Murphy is the guy that if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. He's always meddling in our activities. So we got to be ready for those Murphys that pop up. Probably the greatest concern for us is that it can easily be used for tracking us. It can track our movements live, or even, if they gain access to it, they can find out where we've been. And based on the communication with the cell towers. We can't take an activated phone with us when we're out and about conducting our SDRs, because what's the purpose? The tracking of you is a vulnerability. Today we download so many different apps, and a lot of times when you're activating them, they'll ask you, do you want to be it to allow you to track, and only when you're using the app or all the time. Probably the average person has like 10, 15, 20 apps that potentially are tracking them, so that's a vulnerability. If someone always knows exactly where you are, huge vulnerability. But then also, how much information are we storing on our phones? There are many computers, really. And so if the local service actually, is able to hack into that phone, is a tremendous amount of information. Not only sensitive information we have on our phone, but also, who are we connected with? I'm not just talking about other Americans, other individuals who are working in the embassy. But I'm talking about if we happen to be meeting with sensitive sources, right? And have communicated with them via our phone, that can also compromise a source. So, and they can upload malware to our phones. All these things can be done also to people in the private sector. So I think it's very important for all of us to be very concerned that our phones make us very vulnerable. If I were to tell you that in Langley, our headquarters, nobody brings in cell phones into the headquarters, that should be pretty significant, right? That we consider cell phones vulnerable, that we don't even allow them into our secure facilities. A lot of people just are complacent. They don't think this would ever happen to them. Why do they need to care? But that's this complacency and really lack of awareness. That's the greatest threat, I think. The information is already out there. Even if you've been very, really careful about what you put out there, think about how many breaches probably that you've already have been victimized by. There was a massive breach of OPM, Office of Personnel Management, and that's where the information, the background investigation, all the information that's collected on an individual before deciding to give them a security clearance, that's not just your personal identifier information. This is everything. It was hacked. 22 million clearances held in that system, and it was hacked by the Chinese. The U.S. government all confirmed that it was the Chinese. So think about all that information is out there, right? How are different threat actors potentially using that information? So we have to be aware of how we could be approached. If someone is reaching out to us, and I always say there's like 5 different communication channels today. It could be through that email, it could be through that text message, it could be through social media, direct messaging, it could be through a telephone call, or it could be just in person. What are they asking us? What information are they asking of us that could be sensitive? If this is a fraudster or any type of other threat actor, if that information gets in the wrong hands, how detrimental could it be to us or to the entity that we're working for? I'm not saying being super paranoid with every single email, text we get, but if that's prompting us to take an action, that's when we got to sit back and think, okay, if this action could be detrimental, I need to verify that it's authentic before trusting it. So that's a slogan I use a lot of times when I speak: verify, then trust. It's not like what Ronald Reagan coined, trust then verify. Today in this digital world, if we trust then verify, it's too late, right? Damage has been done. I was a threat actor in the countries where I was operating, right? Because I was trying to recruit people. I learned how to manipulate people. I was deceptive, right? But I had my ultimate goal. I had a purpose, was working for the U.S. government, working for my country, right? But at the same time, I saw how I was able to, initially deceive and manipulate people to accomplish this goal. So I used tempered trust in all my interactions with people. I try not to blindly trust what anybody says to us. And I think this is one of the problems we have in society. We need trust. Trust is not a bad thing. When we have blind trust, that can be really detrimental to us or to our organization if we're trusting in somebody that can use it against us. So I think being much more cautious in anything that's coming my way to be able to verify whether this is authentic or not. I think that was probably the biggest change from the standpoint of my mindset. in the private world. The second is there's a number of different security procedures also that I continue to utilize. If I'm going into a restaurant, my wife automatically knows I'm going to choose the table. I'm going to choose where I'm going to sit. I'm not going to have my back to the door or back to the windows. I'm going to always be able to see what's out there in front of me. I'm never going to sit right next to the window. I'm going to sit more in the interior, in the back. It's all automatic now. I got to be ready if there's an attack, like a terrorist attack or something coming through the door. I got to know. I got to be able to have time to react to it. Or if I'm driving a vehicle and typically we get to a stoplight, we get up pretty close next to that vehicle that's ahead of us, right? And we don't necessarily leave much space. But I learned you leave enough space so that if you get in an emergency, you can easily break out of there.